Hey guys, LC Holt here, and this is my weekly update for January 21st. Today, we're going to be talking once again about the Zodiac Killer. This is part 4 in our Zodiac series, and today we're going to be exploring some more of those crazy suspects, but it's going to be viewer-requested suspects. So some of these guys are a little questionable, but because you guys requested it, we're going to do them, and we're going to kind of do them in order they were requested. But before we jump into this, I'm going to introduce my frequent co-host on these Zodiac shows, Mr. Zach Myers. Zach, how you doing today, man?
How the hell you doing, man?
I am doing fantastic. And I also want to say hello to David Phillips and Harry over there in the chat. We already have people joining us for another fun Zodiac discussion.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, so let's kick this sucker off. The first viewer-requested suspect in the Zodiac Killer case is a guy by the name of Earl Van Best. You heard of Earl Van Best?
Yeah, he's an interesting individual. I'm glad that he was requested.
And would you like to see a picture of Mr. Van Best?
I would.
Yes, that is Mr. Earl Van Best, looking very disinterested about something. But what is he disinterested in? I don't know. Probably the fact that, well, there are a lot of things he could have been disinterested in. Okay, do you want to hear how this whole theory came about in which Mr. Van Best was accused?
You go ahead.
Okay, so in order to understand this theory, you got to know about a guy named Gary Stewart. Now, Gary Stewart is vice president of a company down in Louisiana, a cleaning supply company, okay? He was adopted. In 2002, his birth mother contacted him and told him the story of how he was conceived. And he was conceived by her, this lady named Judith, and a man named Earl Van Best Jr. Okay, so finally, Mr. Stewart had a name to go with his parents, his actual parents. He was adopted by a very loving family, okay? But he wanted to know, as I imagine a lot of people do when they're adopted, who their actual kin is. So he found this out, and then he found out that there was an even creepier story surrounding his conception, okay? His mother, Judith, was 14 years old around that when he was born.
Oh, wow.
And she got hooked up with a rare book salesman named Earl Van Best, who was at that time 27.
Jesus Christ.
So, you know, he was robbing the cradle, basically, and Earl Van Best was. And he took Judith, and he absconded with her. And this was all in Louisiana. Now, this is where Judith was from. And basically, they were on the run from the law because it's illegal to take a child bride and impregnate her.
Which in most cases it is.
Yeah, right. In most cases it is and should be. And so Judith gave birth to a healthy baby boy, but she didn't know what to do. So apparently she took the kid and dropped him off in an apartment complex and disappeared.
Oh, jeez.
So luckily for Mr. Stewart, he was adopted by, you know, a loving family and everything, and he was raised, and he became a very successful man, as I said before. And then finally he found out who his mother was, and his mother told him, you know, this whole story. For many years, he tried to search for his father. And after about 10 years after he learned who his father was, he decided that based on his research, he was going to co-write a book called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer.
Oh, okay. I know where this is going.
Yeah, so according to Mr. Stewart, the research he did into trying to find out who his father was led him to believe that Earl Van Best Jr. was in fact the Zodiac Killer. Okay. Now, Would you like to hear some evidence?
I would love to hear some evidence.
Okay, this is some of the evidence that Gary Stewart points to. Okay, now in San Francisco at the Chronicle, there was a writer named Paul Lavery. And a lot of people familiar with the Zodiac case know the name Paul Lavery because he went on to become involved with the Zodiac investigation, and he wrote a lot about it. The Zodiac actually sent him some correspondence that was somewhat threatening. And but before all that, Paul Lavery wrote a story about this case of Earl Van Best taking the girl and on the run, and he called it the ice cream romance, or the ice cream parlor romance. Okay, so Gary Stewart points to this as being a reason why the Zodiac was so interested in Paul Lavery. He said that if Earl Van Best, his father, was the Zodiac, then maybe he was trying to get revenge on Paul Lavery and threaten him because Paul Lavery had written a story about his relationship with the 14-year-old girl, Judith.
Oh, okay.
All right. Now, Earl Van Best was also, according to Gary Stewart, someone who grew up and abused animals. And as you know, with Zodiac or serial killers in general, the abuse of animals
is not uncommon for psychopaths and sociopaths to do that.
Right. I mean, you could make a long list of serial killers who abused animals in their youth. I don't know if Earl Van Best did, but Gary Stewart said that his research told him that his father abused animals. Now, there's a poem. Remember back when we did that show, the First Suspect show, and I talked about Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside?
Yes.
Remember, I showed a picture on that show, and if you guys want to see it, go back to the First Suspect show we did in this series. There is a picture of a desk, and on the desk, somebody in City College there in Riverside, which is right outside of, or is right next to where Sherry Jo Bates was murdered, someone had etched into the desk a poem, and a lot of people point to that writing on the desk as being the writing of the Zodiac, because a lot of people believe Sherry Jo Bates was a Zodiac victim. Not everybody does, but a lot of people, especially the armchair detective type people, point to that as being a Zodiac case that was never really tied in with the other ones. Well, on that poem, at the very bottom of it, the author seems to have signed with initials R.H. Now, Gary Stewart said that Earl Van Best used 2 aliases in his lifetime. I mean, he was a rare book salesman. Who the hell knows why he's using aliases, right? But according to Gary Stewart, he did use aliases, and one of them was Richard Lee, and the other was Harry Lee.
Oh.
So he says the RH is the first initial of each of the aliases his father used, Richard and Harry.
Sounds like a stretch to me, but
yeah, I mean, you know, it's a little tenuous, I would say, to say the least. But, you know, we're going through the evidence because we're talking about...
It's still interesting, still fascinating.
Yeah, and, you know, might as well point out everything that Mr. Stewart is claiming. Now, remember when we talked about Lake Berryessa?
Oh, yes.
The Zodiac told Brian Hartnell, when he had the gun on him, he said, "I'm an escaped inmate from Montana or Colorado." The detail seems to change because I don't think Hartnell is entirely sure which one he said, but it might have been one of the two. He said, "And I escaped from a prison, and I'm trying to get to Mexico." Well, Gary Stewart points out that in his father's job, Earl Van Best traveled to Mexico a lot.
Oh man, it's solved. It's solved then. He has to be the Zodiac.
That's it, honey, the case cracker. And now the next piece of evidence that ties Earl Van Best to this thing is one that we've talked about a bunch, because apparently a lot of these suspects lived very close to where Paul Stine was murdered. Okay. In San Francisco. Well, Earl Van Best lived close to him too. Like everybody was congregating around where Paul Stine was murdered. Okay. So, and Earl Van Best was one of them. Now, okay. Now the next bit, it gets a little bit wacky because here's another thing. Here's a reason why Gary Stewart says Earl Van Best was never caught. Okay. Judith, remember Judith, the young girl, the mother?
Oh, yes.
Well, okay, Judith eventually married a San Francisco police officer. Okay. She was when she got engaged to him around the time that the Zodiac thing was going on. Now, a lot of people claim that, or Gary Stewart claims that the San Francisco Police Department covered up his father's guilt because they didn't want the public to know one of their officers was engaged to the original girlfriend of the Zodiac killer. Okay, so this goes, so what Gary Stewart is saying here is that the reason the San Francisco Police Department is still to this day not paying attention to his theory about Earl Van Best is because they are in part of an ongoing conspiracy to hide the identity because some random police officer got engaged to Van Best's first girlfriend.
Well, it might happen. It's a stretch, but you know, who the hell am I to say it didn't? You know, it's not true.
And one of the things he says about this is Stewart has provided DNA samples to the San Francisco Police Department, and he says that they have turned him away, and they're not paying attention to that and the other evidence that's presented in the book. Now, here's the thing about that. The San Francisco Police Department, or any police department that works on a case that's this high profile, has to be very careful how much money they allot to stuff like DNA testing because it's very expensive.
Oh, yeah.
So, in other words, if I come forward and I say, I know this guy in Arizona and his name is Zach Myers and he's the Zodiac killer, and here's some evidence. All right, you're worried now, aren't you?
Just a little bit.
But if I made that claim without any evidence to substantiate it, the police department is probably not going to take that seriously enough to warrant spending money on DNA testing you.
I sure as hell hope not.
And well, if they didn't, they wouldn't be doing their job, because I think there's a good case I can make against you, Zach.
Hey, you know, I do strike a resemblance to that handsome devil you showed earlier.
And I mean, you were like a little sperm with an executioner's hood. You had a little gun on Brian Hartnell.
Well, the case is solved. I'm the Zodiac.
But anyway, so that's one of the things that he talks about. They didn't get back to him on the evidence that he provided. And like I say, I think a lot of that has to do with that's a high-profile case. Everyone has a suspect that they like. A lot of people have fathers who they think were the Zodiac killer. And basically, if San Francisco was doing DNA testing on all of these people without other corroborating evidence, you would be doing DNA testing on thousands of people probably. So what I'm saying is they got to have evidence other than just your book and your theory. There has to be something that ties them to a crime scene. There needs to be a fingerprint. There needs to be something to warrant the expense of DNA testing. Otherwise, they would be DNA testing everybody. And according to them, there's just not enough on Earl Van Best to warrant a DNA test. Okay. One of the things we were talking about the fingerprints, Gary Stewart says that his father had a scarred thumb, and that this scarred thumb is very close to the scarred thumbprint the Zodiac left on the Paul Stine crime scene. The police, I guess, looked into that, and it doesn't really match. So that's another strike against him. Now, there's another thing that Gary Van Best points to. Gary Van Best. Oh, I'm giving him his father's name. Gary Stewart points to, and that is the handwriting, his father's handwriting, which he says was on the marriage certificate to his mother, to Judith. Judith claims that Earl Van Best filled out the certificate. The people who did the marriage said that the priest filled out the certificate. Earl Van Best or Gary Stewart says that the handwriting is very close to the Zodiac's. So if that's the case, there might be a priest out there who's the Zodiac killer, because evidently the priest filled out the marriage certificate and not Earl Van Best.
Oh, wow. There's a lot of Zodiac killers out there.
I tell you, everybody's the Zodiac, according to some of these. I mean, they would have to be. We're at the end of this show, we will have talked about 8 suspects. So that means we're talking about a lot of innocent people, which is a fact that is not lost on me, that a lot of these people are dead and we are talking about them. But, you know, what I do as opposed to other videos and stuff is I will never tell you that one of these people is for sure the Zodiac killer. This series is not about going, case solved, this is the Zodiac killer. It's simply about... Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely say that you're the Zodiac killer. But other than that, I'm not going to say that, because that's not what this is about. This is about presenting evidence, and you guys can make of the evidence whatever you will. Now, that was a bit of a side note. I suppose that kind of wraps up a lot of what Gary Stewart points to in his book in terms of his father being the Zodiac killer. I might want to point out that Gary Stewart is not the first, nor will he be the last person to say that his father was the Zodiac killer. That's actually happened several times before.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure like it's a club.
Yeah, my dad was the Zodiac killer. They have like little meetings in church basements. They have little styrofoam cups of coffee and they go around, you know. A couple of the people who would have been in these meetings, I'm going to kind of point out now that we're talking about, you know, the subject of my father was the Zodiac killer. In 2009, which isn't all that long ago, about 10 years ago, a lady named Deborah Perez did the same thing. She held a press conference and she claimed that her father, Guy Ward Henriksen, that's a mouthful, no relation to Lance. She said that he was the Zodiac killer and that he actually used to take her when she was a little girl to the crimes, and that she was on the scene of the crimes and heard the pop, pop, pop of the gunshots. And she thought they were firecrackers. And then he would come back and get in the car. And she said that he made her as a child write some of these Zodiac letters, and she recognizes some of her own writing in them.
I'm sure did.
Yeah, and she did a press conference, and it was one of those things where all the cameras are out on the doorstep of the city hall or wherever they were, you know, some building. And she does this, it's like an FDR speech, you know. She's like, and my father, I must say, was the Zodiac killer, you know, and everyone goes, it's supposed to gasp, and they're rolling their eyes, you know. But she did that sort of deal and got some publicity and got some airtime, and it's worth noting she also said that JFK was her father, so you know you can kind of put it there. And I'm not joking; she actually did say that JFK was her father. Okay.
Oh wow.
So there was that. Then there was another guy named Dennis Kaufman. And Dennis Kaufman also made the morning news circuit rounds because, like a lot of, you know, folks, when you say my dad was the Zodiac, you tend to go on a little press junket where you go to different morning shows and afternoon shows and do interviews and you get some publicity, you know. So I'm sure that has nothing to do with your father, you know, you claiming your father's the Zodiac. There was a guy named Dennis Kaufman who claimed that his father, Jack Torrance, you recognize that name?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's the guy. The guy's real name was Jack Torrance. I don't know if he ever stayed at the Overlook. But Dennis is still alive, so maybe him and his mother escaped when his father went into that ice maze. But Dennis said that his stepfather, Jack, was the Zodiac killer, said he was a really kind of evil, cruel guy, and he has tapes that he says are his father or his stepfather, Jack, confessing to being the Zodiac. He's the guy, I think on one of the earlier shows, I told you about a situation where, you know, a guy went on a hard copy type show and opened up the television set, or I think it was like an amp or something, and pulled out a black hood and it had the Zodiac symbol on it.
Oh, yes.
Well, that is the Dennis Kaufman. He's that guy.
Oh, okay. I feel like, wow, every person out there that hates their father, they're just going to be like, you know what? I'm going to accuse my dad of being the Zodiac killer because you know what? Fuck him. And I sort of, it's just,
Yeah, it's
oh,
like,
wow, man.
and he's like, they're like, that'll learn him. So
That'll learn him.
So Dennis Kaufman was like, he didn't like Jack, so he was like, this'll learn him. So he pulled out this hood, and it looked like it was something that you and I could have made, you know, in the backyard or something. But he also had some rolls of undeveloped film. And he said that he turned this over to the FBI, and he said he developed one of these rolls, and he's pretty sure it's pictures of people being murdered. I guess it wasn't pictures of people being murdered because nothing ever came of this. This was another thing that was dismissed by the cops as being, I got another father. So I was like, they probably had a joke about it down at the office, like, hey, Bert, is your father the Zodiac? No, Joe, is yours? So basically, that is Earl Van Best in a nutshell, as well as some of the other members of the My Father Was the Zodiac Club. Now, I hear tell that you have a viewer requested suspect that you'd like to talk about. Is that right?
Yes. I would like to talk about Gareth Penn.
And I know Gareth Penn is related to another guy. Are you talking about Gareth Penn and Michael O'Hare?
Yes, I am.
And would you like to and let's show a picture of these handsome gentlemen. What do you say?
Yeah, let's show the people. Good God, look at that beard.
The handsome fellow there with the Rasputin beard is Gareth Penn. Okay, and the guy that's up there, the smaller picture, is a picture of Michael O'Hare, taken around the time of the Zodiac killings. He is still alive. They're both still alive. Michael O'Hare works at a college now. I didn't want to show a modern picture of him, so that's a picture of him from what I assume would be a high school yearbook or something. It looks like a yearbook picture.
It looks like he's going to take your soul. Look at those eyes.
So what do you think about, what do you got to share with us?
Well, Gareth Penn was a freelance writer, and he was obsessed with the Zodiac case. Well, about 1980, in December of 1980, Penn was, he heard about the Zodiac letters and was able to look at some of them and stuff. And he claims that in one Zodiac letter that was never, ever published, it was never shown by anybody or anything, that it has a very important quote that apparently the Zodiac said. He said, if police were able to place a radon on Mount Diablo, they would find something interesting. Well, Gareth Penn was obsessed with that. And he was constantly obsessed.
Now, I have a picture of both the letter and the map that you're talking about. Let's show the audience what you're talking about, shall we?
Yeah, show them.
Okay, now that is the letter that Zach was referring to. Down at the bottom, it says, the map coupled with this code will tell you where the bomb is set. You have until next fall to dig it up. Now, according to this radiant theory that Gareth Penn likes to talk about. Oh, before I talk about the radiant theory, let's show let's show the map, shall we? So that's only for the first part. That's the letter, and along with the letter came the map I'm about to show you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the map. Okay, all this came in June of 1970 to the San Francisco Chronicle. The map, there's a crosshair up there right on top of Mount Diablo. And it has the 4 points like you would see on a compass. It says at the north point, it says 0. At the east, it says 3. At the west, it says W. At south, it says 6. And the words next to it, I don't know if you can see it there. I think you can. He writes pretty clearly. It says, is to be set at Mag in, which means magnetic north. Now, there's a difference between magnetic north and true north, and I won't get into all that. But because this theory actually, Gareth Penn is a mathematician. I am not. The radiant theory is a kind of really complicated mathematical type theory. But there was actually another letter that went along with this, because the Zodiac seemed to be on this radiant kick for a while. And in that letter, there's a little thing that says there's like a really big crosshairs, the Zodiac symbol. It took up about half the page. And beneath it, it said, under the letter PS, the Mount Diablo code concerns radians and number inches along the radians. So a lot of people, including Gareth Penn, think that if you go through here and you look at the radian angles on this crosshairs, that these angles will line up with various murder scenes where the Zodiac killed people. That's it in a nutshell, okay? And it also was meant to be used in some which way to find a bomb that the Zodiac said that he planted, because Zodiac was really into bomb making and threatening to blow people up, especially later on. He kind of moved that way. So anyway, so that's the radiant theory in a nutshell. The bomb never went off, so it was probably the Zodiac bullshitting yet again. But anyway, go on with Gareth Penn.
Well, Penn was also convinced, which it was something that he noticed, and I think some other people noticed it too, that a lot of the crime scenes were near water or had something to do with water, something to do with water in the name. And I have some of the examples right here. And for the viewers, prepare yourself, because one of these is a huge stretch. Okay, you got Riverside, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and then for my personal favorite, Washington and Cherry Street. Now, that is such a freaking stretch. He just had to throw that one in there and be like, well, no, Washington and Cherry Street. That'll work. That'll work perfectly. And he was convinced that the killer was doing this for a reason. So, and for some odd reason, he also was convinced that the Zodiac killer was an artist.
Okay.
And he kept trying to do all this research and detective work to find an artist that would fit these certain, likenesses and stuff that he had in his head and stuff. And he couldn't find one. But did he give up? No, he didn't. He found the son of an artist.
That'll
really
do.
He was really hunting, this guy was.
If you can't find an artist, find his son. So is that son? Is that son Mr. Michael O'Hare?
That is Michael O'Hare, and he called H2O because of the O'Hare, and like again, he's stretching. I think that he just wanted to place this on almost anyone he could. He was convinced. And Michael O'Hare is a professor at U.S. Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught arts and the environment. And let me just point this out to everybody. Michael O'Hare was never around or anywhere near when the Zodiac killings took place. That's what's really funny about this. But for so many years, Gareth Penn was like telling the cops and everybody, you need to investigate this guy. You need to look into it. And he did it so much that the police, after a while, was like, okay, well, we did look into him. We looked into him quite a bit. Well, we're more interested in you now. And so he kind of fucked himself over, putting all the blame on him for so long and coming up with all these radical concepts that don't really make a lot of sense. Got the light shined on him.
Oh man, Gareth Penn must have been a very thirsty individual with all this damn water.
Oh man, dude. Well, that's that beer, and it's sucking the life out of him.
Gareth, so I mean, there are a lot of sons of artists. What in the hell did he have against Michael O'Hare, of all people, I wonder?
Well, it was the name. I think that he was just convinced, because it had the O in the middle, and I don't know. I think he needed help personally. He was so convinced that it was an artist, and because he couldn't find an artist, he Well, why the hell not? Let's blame it on his son.
Wow. Well, that's a case of, like it's like you got a dart board and just throw it, and wherever the dart hits, that's the Zodiac killer. Eventually that's the sort of thing this gets down to when you get into some of these
Hell,
wilder.
that sounds like a fun game.
Yeah,
like,
I would play that game. But no, I mean, it's a tough game to play when you have people who are, legitimate citizens and stuff. And Michael O'Hare is a real guy. Obviously, he's a guy who's still alive.
he still teaches. He still teaches today. So
he does. In researching this show, I found his page over at UC Berkeley, and I was looking at it, and I was just thinking, it gives his phone number, and I'm thinking, how many crazy people must call this guy and just be like, so you're the Zodiac, huh? Like, man, what a life. What a life. But, you have to be very careful of who you accuse of things like this, because, I don't know. Not everybody's the Zodiac killer, and just because someone's the son of an artist and they have H2O in their name or whatever, and you have a water obsession, but that is pretty funny. Washington and Cherry.
That's my personal favorite. I love how he threw that one in there, and he was just like, well, I'm going to make that fit.
Well, that's it, honey. The case cracker. I think we can end every one of these suspect segments with My Cousin Vinny. The case cracker.
The case cracker.
Yeah. But, I mean, hey, I guess Gareth Penn, I assume, being a mathematician, is a smart guy. I certainly don't want to say that or anything bad about him. But, just because someone is smart doesn't necessarily mean that they're right about everything. In fact, that kind of leads into the third viewer-requested suspect. So would you like to hear who this third viewer-requested suspect is? He is Mr. Theodore Kaczynski. Now, Theodore Kaczynski, I'm going to show you a picture of him. Okay, hang on just a second. Here comes a picture.
Doesn't look anything like he does now.
Now, that's a picture of Theodore Kaczynski around the time that the Zodiac killings took place. He was born in 1942, so he was in his 20s around the time that happened. Theodore was born in Chicago, Illinois, to a second-generation Polish family. Very intelligent guy. From when he was a kid, he was basically a prodigy, a very, very intelligent young man, but he was also kind of socially awkward, isolated. His parents actually thought when he was younger that he might be autistic. He was that far removed from kind of social society and friends and stuff like that. Showed a great aptitude for science and for math. So he went to Evergreen Park High School and he graduated from there. He went to Harvard College. Okay, he graduated from Harvard in 1962 with a BA in math. Okay, so he went to Harvard. Smart dude, math. Enrolled at the university.
Right there, alone, he went to Harvard. That's impressive.
He enrolled in the University of Michigan, where he earned a master's degree and a doctorate in math. So he is a doctor. Graduated in 1967, which is around the time that photograph I showed you took place. Also, probably worth noting that he was the youngest. I believe he was one of the youngest Harvard enrollees at the time when he went in there. He skipped 2 grades of high school because he was so smart, and he went straight into Harvard. Late 1967, he became the youngest assistant professor of math ever at where? UC Berkeley, which is the same place Michael O'Hare taught. He taught geometry and calculus. Now, a lot of his students did not really care for Mr. Kaczynski. Not because he was a hard teacher or because he was an asshole, but mainly because he was very quiet. He was not very good at dealing with people. He generally would sit at the front of the class and read from a book. And he wouldn't answer questions. If you raised your hand and had a question, he wouldn't answer it really. He would just go from the book and just be reading it. And so kind of a dull teacher is basically what their complaint was, okay? So he was there for about 2 years. In 1969, abruptly, he resigned. He's like, I don't want to be a college professor anymore. Everyone was kind of shocked because here was this guy who had, he had proven a theorem that had stumped his professors in college. And he was a guy that was like on his way up. People were like, this guy he could win awards. He could be a millionaire or something. He could do great things. But he just said, no, I don't want to be a college professor anymore. And he walked away. Moved back to Illinois where his parents lived. And then 2 years after that, he built himself a cabin in Lincoln, Montana. He got 1.5 acres of land in Lincoln, Montana, built himself a cabin on it, and just said, to hell with it. And he moved into the cabin. It was like 6 foot by 8 foot, very isolated, no running water, no electricity. He had this thing, I'm going to get back to nature and I'm leaving society behind. I don't know who these people are. I can't relate to them. I don't have anything to say to them. So he just disappeared into the wilderness. He would bicycle into town occasionally to read at the library. Occasionally he would go and visit with his brother David and David's wife, but basically went off the grid. Okay. Now, something kind of happened when he was living in Montana. At first, he was very happy with his new, quiet, simple lifestyle. But then he started to hear motorcycles. Then he started to hear logging trucks. Then he started to hear people building shit near him. And he just heard this noise, and it was apparently just driving him nuts. And he was like, why can't I get away from all this construction? So he secretly started to go and sabotage some of this equipment at these construction sites because he was like, by God, I'm sick of hearing it. I'm trying to live completely off the grid and nobody will let me do it. I got motorcycles over here. I got construction going on. It's driving me crazy. So at that point, I don't think anyone ever figured out that he was doing the whole sabotage deal. Okay. But he was actually up to more than that. And now I'm going to talk to you about some incidents that took place over the course of about 16 years. Okay. May 25th, 1978 at Northwestern University. That's in Illinois, right? That's where that's where he's from originally. That's where his parents are from. A bomb at the university is planted and it goes off in someone's hand. Okay. It was just a wrapped up bomb made of wood. It didn't have much of an explosion to it. It burned them, cut them a little bit with shrapnel, but essentially it was kind of minor wounds. Okay. At the same college, almost a year later, May 9th, 1979, same thing happens to a different person, minor burns, minor cuts. Now, these were very simple little bombs. And no one really paid too much attention to it because no one was seriously injured or killed or anything. It was of interest to the local police, but in terms of FBI and everything, they didn't care. Well, the FBI did start to care because November 15th, 1979, American Airlines Flight 444. Passengers are on the plane. Suddenly, smoke starts coming up into the passenger compartment. Everyone's freaking out. They manage to land the plane, and what they find is that a bomb in the underbelly of the plane with the mail had gone off, not exploded. Had it exploded, would have killed everybody on the plane. It just caught fire, and it burned the mail, created a little fire down there, and that was the smoke that came up. Okay?
Wow.
Now, the bomb was relatively sophisticated. It had a barometric switch on it to initiate the explosion, which would have blown up the plane. That failed, luckily, and the plane didn't blow up and these people weren't killed. That got the FBI involved because when you start to attack airlines, this becomes terrorism.
Oh, yeah, seriously.
And in the 1970s, this kind of stuff had been happening, so they're taking it very, very seriously. Okay. Now, June 10th of 1980, in Lake Forest, Illinois, a guy named Percy Wood, president of United Airlines, gets a book in the mail. He had prior to that, he'd been sent a letter that said, "I'm going to send you a book, and it's got great social significance. You're going to like it." Well, this book arrives, and it's Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson, which is a book that does not have great social significance. Percy Wood was like, "Who would send me this?" He opens the book, and the book explodes.
Oh, geez.
It burns him, cuts him, doesn't do anything. It doesn't kill him, but it could have killed him. But he lucked out, and Percy Wood survived. Now, all of the bombs so far all had a distinguishing feature on them. Someone had put the letters FC, had put them on the caps of the bombs in such a way that it wouldn't be destroyed by the explosion. Okay, so obviously the bomber is the same guy doing all of this, and he wants people to know, I'm the same guy, and these letters FC mean something if you want to catch me. Now, October 8th, 1981, University of Utah, bomb is found, doesn't go off, they defuse it. They find it, it's a pretty complicated bomb. Luckily, it was a dud. May 5th, 1982, Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, a secretary picks up a bomb meant for a professor, and it explodes, burns her, cuts her, doesn't hurt her beyond that. July 2nd, 1982, UC Berkeley again. An engineering professor gets a bomb, it explodes, again, minor burns, minor cuts. Okay. May 15th, 1985, so several years later, also at UC Berkeley, a graduate student picks up a box, goes, "What the hell is this?" And it explodes, blows off 4 of his fingers, and takes out the vision in his left eye.
Jesus Christ.
So as you see, these bombs are starting to become more and more complicated and powerful as they go along. Now, June 13th, 1985, the Boeing Company, airplanes in Washington State. A guy notices an unusual package, reports it. Thankfully, he does because it's a bomb, and they managed to defuse it. November 15th, 1985, University of Michigan. A psychology student who is an assistant to a professor, and the professor that he's assisting are hit by another bomb. Burns, cuts, luckily they survive. A lot of blood around, but they pull through. Now, December the 11th, 1985, in terms of this string of bombings, is a very important date because at a Sacramento computer store, a guy named Hugh Scruton goes out into his parking lot and sees a piece of wood with 4 nails sticking up out of it. And he thinks to himself, somebody's going to run that over. So I'm going to be a good guy. I'm going to go pick this thing up. He goes over, picks it up. It's more than a piece of wood with 4 nails sticking out of it, okay? It's a bomb. It blows his left arm off, puts a hole in his chest, kills him dead. So this is the first time that one of these bombs kills a person. Now, February 20th, 1987, about 2 years later, in Salt Lake City, another computer store. There is another bomb disguised as a piece of wood with 4 nails sticking out of it. Now, in this instance, one of the ladies who works in the computer store looks out the window and sees a guy setting the bomb down. She doesn't know it's a bomb. She thinks it's a piece of wood with nails sticking out of it. But she notices the man, and she's able to give them a composite sketch. Now, would you like to see this sketch, Zach? It's pretty famous.
Oh, man, I'd love to.
So that picture is a picture drawn by a police artist of what the lady says she saw outside the Salt Lake City computer store. Luckily, that bomb went off. There was cuts to an arm and some nerve damage, but the person did not die, thankfully. But now the police and the FBI have at least something to go on in this case. Now, listen, it continues. June 22nd, 1993, in California, a geneticist gets another one of these bombs. It blows up, he loses 3 fingers. June 24th, same weekend, 1993, a Yale University professor, that's up in Connecticut, he gets a bomb, it blows off his right hand. Now, his brother gets a telephone call from the bomber. And the brother says, who is this? And the guy goes, "You're next," and hangs up. Now, I happen to have said that to a few people, but that was fictitious in a movie. This was in real life, and I'm sure very scary. Now, in December 10th, 1994, in North Caldwell, New Jersey, an advertising executive gets a bomb. He doesn't know it's a bomb, it's a package. He opens up the package. Let me tell you something. This bomb decapitates him. It blows his head clean off. So here's casualty number 2. April 24th of the next year in Sacramento, there's a timber industrialist. He's a lobbyist, major lobbyist in Washington for the timber industry. He gets another one of these bombs. He opens up the package. It blows him completely to pieces. Blows him apart.
Shit.
That is the last bomb and the last casualty. 16 years, 16 bombs. So the FBI, right after the airline bombing, they start a division to investigate who this guy is. And the division is called Unabomber. And the guy, the suspect, was called the Unabomber. Now, the reason he's called the Unabomber is because it's a name based around the locations and the businesses that he liked to target. So UN for universities and A for airlines. So that's how you get Unabomber. Okay? So they start to look into this case. Now, remember, the guy that got blown to pieces, the timber lobbyist, that was in 1995. The same year, a series of letters are mailed to various media outlets. The Unabomber himself is asking them to publish a 35,000-word essay that he has composed called Industrial Society and Its Future. And he says that if you publish this, I will cease to terrorize the country. I will stop making bombs and sending them. This is called by the FBI the Unabomber Manifesto. Now, the manifesto is eventually published because they figure, look, let's publish it. If we don't publish it, we know he's going to blow up more people, so let's give this a try. It's published, and the basic thesis of it is that the Industrial Revolution is what's destroyed the world. Technology is what's going to put people down. So the Unabomber is trying to throw a wrench in the gears of anything that's technological or industrial in order to keep society from progressing in such a way that it'll eventually destroy itself with its own technology. That's the overall concept of the Unabomber's manifesto. Now, another reason they published this wasn't just to get him to stop bombing people, because they kind of figured, this guy might do it again, even if we publish it. But they also wanted to put it out there so that people would have a 35,000-word example of this guy's mind and the way he writes. And they thought, well, maybe someone will recognize in this somewhere some clue that could help us. Well, come to find out, the FBI was right, because David Kaczynski, Ted's brother, reads this, and his sister-in-law reads this, and they go, this sounds like Ted. And they call the FBI, and they say, David says, I think my brother is the Unabomber. The FBI goes to the cabin in Montana, April 3rd, 1996. They walk up. They don't want to sneak up on the guy. They're posing a little ruse going on, saying they're forestry workers. They're like, excuse me, sir, could you show us a property line over here? He's like, yeah, sure, let me get my coat. And when he turns around, they grab him from behind, handcuff him, take him in. So the Unabomber is caught and remains in custody to this day. Now, the reason I'm giving you all this Unabomber information is to tell you about the suspect, but it's also so I can tell you some of the for and against Ted Kaczynski being the Zodiac. We know that Ted Kaczynski, the cops are convinced he was not the Zodiac, but there are a lot of very interesting similarities. And since this was viewer requested, let's go over some of those similarities. Shall we, Zach?
I think we should.
Okay, so Ted Kaczynski lived in San Francisco from 1967 to 1969, which is around the time that the Zodiac was doing this. He moved away not long after the last Zodiac murder. Both were intelligent. They both liked to write letters and to taunt the police and the authorities. You know, Ted, I was telling you about the FC that he put on the bomb caps. That actually doesn't mean anything. He also included a letter in one of the bombs that has a bunch of nonsensical gibberish and refers to people that aren't real people. So he's trying to throw the cops off. He's like, "Ooh, I'm going to give them some clues, and they're going to think it's one thing, but they really mean nothing." That was a big thing about Ted Kaczynski as a way of kind of hiding his identity. He basically just gave them a lot of false clues. Both of them demanded the newspaper print something that they wrote, or else they're going to kill people. Both were interested in constructing very complicated bombs. Now, pretty soon we're going to do a show about the Zodiac's letters and ciphers, and we'll go more into that then. But Zodiac was really interested in bombs. He sent very complicated bomb diagrams for bombs that weren't just like a pipe bomb, light a fuse, and throw it in a school bus. These were very creative bombs. And Ted Kaczynski started out very simple and then got very creative with his bombing. So they both like bombs. Also, some person I noticed pointed out that the Zodiac with Brian Hartnell in Lake Berryessa, he said that he escaped from a jail in Montana, and Ted Kaczynski was living in Montana. Okay, actually, he wasn't living in Montana at that time, but he would later move to Montana. Now, here are the differences, and these are pretty significant. The fingerprints don't match. The DNA doesn't match. The handwriting doesn't match. Ted liked to kill people with bombs, and the Zodiac liked to kill people with guns and knives. So obviously, the police have already said, okay, this is not the Zodiac killer. We're not worried about Ted being the killer. Oh, another thing is the voice. The voice was very different. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Ted Kaczynski speak, but he has a very high and squeaky voice. And he was also a very skinny and slight individual. So that does not match with Brian Hartnell, what he said about the Zodiac killer. Being a big guy with a kind of a deeper voice. So that's Ted Kaczynski. What do you think about Teddy?
I find him to be a very fascinating individual. But yeah, I'm not convinced in the least that he's the Zodiac. But no, he's a very fascinating. There's nothing worse than like a crazy smart person.
There's nothing worse than what?
A smart, crazy person.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because then you got making bombs and crap. I mean, obviously he was really intelligent to do stuff like that, but he was just a nutcase on the other hand.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Teddy was a bit of a nutty person. I want to throw this out to our chatters over there on the chat window. Of the three people we've talked about today, do you think any of these people are the Zodiac? And while you guys are responding, I would like to say, Zach, these have been some very interesting shows about the suspects. David Phillips says that Ted was a skinny wimp. So he is not convinced that Ted Kaczynski is the Zodiac. Neither am I, David. Good call.
I'm with you on that there, buddy. Skinny wimp. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, Ted, the one thing about Ted was he liked to kill people from afar. The Zodiac did like to kill people when he was looking them basically in the eye. Sometimes he shot people in the back of the head, but he was a hands-on guy. Ted was not a hands-on guy. Ted was like, I'm going to send this to you, and a couple weeks from now, you're going to blow up.
3 to 5 weeks, your ass is going to blow up.
Right. Yeah, David says he didn't think any of these are the Zodiac, and I agree. In fact, I would almost subtitle this show The Least Likely Suspects. But these were
what did the Washington and Cherry Street didn't convince anyone?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. Were any of you convinced by Washington and Cherry? I know I wasn't, but Gareth Penn certainly was. And then, you know, bless Michael O'Hare's heart. He must be a very patient man. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting suspects we've dealt with over the course of these 3 Zodiac shows. And in the future, who knows, we might do more suspect shows. I don't know, but I know that the next set of shows we're going to do are going to be about the letters and the ciphers. And this is something I've been promising for quite some time now, and we're finally getting around to doing it. I wanted to make sure I dealt with all the suspects you guys wanted to hear about first. These 3 were all viewer requested, so if you didn't like the stories of these people, blame somebody else. It's not me. I'm just trying to...
Not my problem.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we had a pretty good show. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Zach, I hope you enjoyed joining me today. I know I always enjoy your company on these things.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everybody for watching, and thank you for requesting these, everyone, and thanks for all your comments and everything. And I, you know, always have a blast coming on.
Yes, I definitely want to thank you guys. You've made this Zodiac series a lot of fun and very successful, and I'm glad that you know, we were able to do these shows for you, and we got 2 more coming up. So I hope that, you know, you guys enjoy those as well. But until then, I just want to tell you all to take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next week.